Next question coming from Mr. Jacobino, and it's directed to Mr. Schiff.
This is from a member of the audience. You both agree that the health care bill should be repealed. Do you believe the Medicare Part D bill should also be repealed?
Well, I mean, I'm against the very concept of the government being involved in Medicare. I think from the very beginning it was a fraud. I mean, when it was sold to the American public, the total cost, I think, was estimated at 1/10 of what the cost was, I think, 15 years ago. I mean, they were so off on how much they thought it was going to cost, and now you have a whole segment of our country that now depends on these benefits. And of course, that is part of the reason that healthcare is so expensive. It's the excess government involvement in our healthcare system that is driving the cost higher. It's government subsidies through the tax code of insurance that is the reason that insurance premiums are so high, or that medical costs are high because of so many third-party payers. They've turned insurance into prepaid medical. So I want to get the government out of providing health care or funding or subsidizing health care in as many places as I can, because we need market forces. The problem with our health care system right now is it's too expensive, and that's a fault of government. That's not a fault of the free market. So if we can get the government out and get market forces in, we can rein in runaway health care costs. We can make health care affordable and accessible to more people.
The legislation that passed should be repealed if for no other reason than the process that was employed was completely partisan, absolutely not transparent, and when the Speaker of the House of Representatives says we have to pass the bill to find out what's in it, that's a good reason to vote against the bill. And I made it a habit a long time ago as a legislator never to vote for a bill, never to favor a bill that I hadn't read and that I didn't have some understanding of. On the issue of Medicare Part D, the Part D reimbursement for medications was designed to bring health care reimbursement up to date. People can manage chronic illnesses with medicines, but under traditional Medicare, you wouldn't get reimbursed. You get reimbursed for hospital visits, for acute, or for hospitalization or doctor's visits when you're in acute crisis. That was too late. If you can manage a chronic condition with a medicine to avoid that expensive acute crisis, well, then that's, in the long run, that's going to save you money. Part D is a public-private partnership, and the donut hole was a cost limiter so that program came in 40% under the OMB estimates. It's the only health care program in the history of our country that has cost less than anticipated. And yet, in the Democrats' new bill, they got rid of the donut hole. I mean, how outrageous is that? That's going to drive the cost through.
You know, a better way, if we really want to bring down the cost of prescription drugs, a much better way to do that would be to reform the FDA. You know, once upon a time, drug companies only had to prove that their drugs didn't hurt people. And if you prove that, then the drugs would be approved. And therefore, it was very inexpensive, and so drugs were less expensive. Today, not only do you have to prove that your drugs don't hurt, but you have to prove they're effective. And proving efficacy costs a fortune. And drug companies have to recoup the enormous costs of those approvals in the high cost of drugs. And I think doctors and patients should be able to decide if they want to use a drug without the government giving it its blessing.
And the next question to Ms. Stewart, audience question. Ms. Stewart will be answering to Mr. Simmons.
This has been a hot button issue today, so you should be up on this one. Should there be a national ID card, and should a child born to an illegal immigrant in the United States be a U.S. citizen?
The national ID card, essentially, we already have it. Social Security card. It's essentially a national ID card. A driver's license, in a sense, is an ID card that we carry around with us if we operate a motor vehicle. I never was concerned about the issue of a national ID card, perhaps because as a military soldier and as a military officer, when I went in the military, I was fingerprinted and photographed and given an ID card, which I still carry around with me. I've carried one around for over 35 years. So that doesn't really bother me. What does bother me is that somebody can come into this country illegally, have a baby, and claim citizenship. bothers me a lot, and I think that derives from an amendment to the Constitution that was ratified after the Civil War, designed specifically to ensure that the children of slaves would not be thrown out of this country, that the children of slaves who were property, not citizens, would be afforded citizenship. Well, you know, the Civil War has been over for quite a while. At least I believe it is. Peter, maybe you could bring me up to date on that. But it's been over for quite a while. And I think that amendment should be stripped because it's outlived its usefulness.
Mr. Schiff.
Yeah, I agree that we do use the Social Security card as a form of a national ID, which is actually against the original purpose when they first passed Social Security. Maybe Rob remembers, but when they first they actually said that Social Security cards will not be used as identification. And of course, people ask me for my Social Security number every time I do anything, so it is a form of national ID. I'm against any additional national identification cards. And I do agree, you know, the amendments following the Civil War, and it wasn't simply letting the children of slaves, but the slaves themselves became citizens because they had been born in the United States. Obviously, when that amendment was passed, nobody envisioned what's happening today. And you know, there's arguments over whether that amendment is being wrongfully interpreted by the Supreme Court. But basically, if we want to change that, and I would be in favor of amending the Constitution, it makes no sense to me. Most countries don't do it that way. Most countries, you have to be born of the citizens of that country to be a citizen. But here, somebody can be illegally in this country, they can be here even on a vacation, and they happen to have a baby, and now that baby is an American citizen. That makes no sense. I think citizenship should follow the citizenship of the parents.
Would you like 10 seconds, Mr. Simmons?
Just on that point, my wife and I lived in China when I served with the CIA. Our daughter was born in China, and if you look at her passport, it says place of birth, China, but I can assure you she's not Chinese. She's American.
She wouldn't be.
Next question, Mr. Jacobino, directed to Mr. Schiff.
This is another one of those split questions, if we can time it out.
Sure. And we'll do the same thing we did last time, a minute 30, then a 30-second rebuttal, and then the next candidate.
Mr. Schiff, you were dismissed by the current as a radical. How do you rebut that?
Well, it's the current. Dismissed by a lot of people as a radical for a long, long time. You know, when I said that, you know, the housing market bubble was going to burst and that real estate prices would drop 30% nationwide and 50% in some of these other states like Nevada or California, you know, they said I was a radical. And when I said that Fannie and Freddie were going to go bankrupt, they said I was a radical. When I said General Motors was going to go bankrupt, that was radical. When I said we were going to have the greatest recession since the Great Depression, that was radical. You know, when I said unemployment was in the top 10%, radical. When I said a few years ago that we were going to have $1 trillion a year budget deficit, that was radical. All those things happen. So what we need is a radical in the Senate. That's the problem.
I may have to say, as a freelance reporter for Fox, who's with the Hartford Current, I may need a rebuttal. Mr. Simmons, would you like to respond to that? 30 seconds.
30 seconds. The word radical comes from the Latin, and I believe it means a root. Like a radish is a root. So a radical is somebody theoretically who gets to the root of the matter. And if we go by that interpretation, being a radical is not a bad thing. Not a bad thing.
The founding fathers were all radicals.